"13 years ago, I came out as gay. And it was a huge, huge relief. And at the time, I remember thinking, thank God I'll never have to do that again. Turns out I was wrong. Because 2 years ago, I came out again. Only this time, instead of announcing that I wasn't attracted to the opposite gender, I announced I was the opposite gender. The day I was born, a doctor slapped me on the ass and said, it's a girl. But the problem was that I never really felt like one. But in our society, gender isn't about how we feel. It's about how we look. It's assigned to us by a doctor at birth based solely upon what's between our legs. But I think that needs to change. One of the first things that I learned about my gender was that it's not only about me. It was about everyone around me, too. When I was a little kid, I grew up here in U City, and I was labeled a tomboy because I was a girl who wanted to do boy stuff, like run around in the yard without my shirt on. I wanted to join the Cub Scouts so I could go camping in the woods overnight. I wanted to play football and baseball and hockey. But back then, in the 70s, girls weren't allowed to do that stuff. So I settled. Instead of the Cub Scouts, I became a brownie. Instead of baseball, softball. And instead of playing hockey, I did the next best thing. I went ice skating. But I had a plan, because at the Heman Park ice rink, they rented boys' hockey skates. And they were black and sleek and like the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And I thought, well, I can't be a hockey star, but I can pretend to be one. So one night, I bounced up to the rental counter in my pigtails and I asked for those skates. And the attendant looked at me, reached back, grabbed a pair of white figure skates, dropped them on the counter in front of me and said, girls, get these. See, it didn't matter that I felt like a little boy on the inside because I looked like a little girl on the outside. As I got older, it got worse. Let me see a show of hands here today. How many of you were born male? Raise your hand. Okay, totally jealous. So, throw it out there. Just put it out there. Okay, now all of you who had your hands up, I want you to think back to the moment this morning when you first walked into the bathroom to shave. Only this time, I want you to really think about what it would feel like if when you looked in the mirror, you realized that the face staring back at you didn't actually need to be shaved because your skin was already perfectly smooth. No facial hair, no stubble whatsoever. Now imagine what you would think if you looked down at your chest. Only now, instead of it being flat, you realize you have breasts. And I don't mean man boobs. Now imagine what you would think if you looked a little further and you realized that your penis was gone. And when you screamed out in horror, the voice that you heard sounded more like your wife or your sister. Now imagine how it would feel if you went to your closet and you got dressed in the exact same outfit that you're wearing right now, and you jump in your car and you drive down here to the event today, and when you walk in and hand your ticket to the TEDx attendant, they look you right in the eye, very sincerely say, thank you, ma'am. Enjoy the event. Once I hit puberty, that's how I felt. Like I was wearing a female bodysuit that I could not take off. And every day when I looked in the mirror, I wanted to scream too. I'm 44, and I didn't start my gender transition until about a year and a half ago. And sometimes when I tell people my story, they say, well, if you struggle with this for so long, why didn't you transition sooner? Well, it's complicated. First of all, I had absolutely no idea where to start. Back in the 70s, there was no such thing as the internet, so I couldn't just Google gender reassignment surgery. And then years later, when the internet came along, it was sort of the opposite problem. There was way too much information. Like articles, blogs, YouTube videos, like completely overwhelming. I didn't know what was true. I didn't know what to believe. I didn't know what would happen to me. Would I lose my family, my job, my hair? I had no idea. Besides, 13 years ago, it was hard enough for me to come out as gay. The thought of telling my parents that I was having a sex change, not on my bucket list. But it was more than that. It was a lot more than that. The truth was that I was terrified. I was terrified of how public I knew it would be. Because let's face it, it is impossible to transition gender without anyone noticing. And just like at the ice rink, I knew that my gender wasn't only about me. My family, my friends, my coworkers, my clients, they were all going to be affected by this, and I knew that many of them would struggle a lot. Because whether I liked it or not, they were all invested in the idea of me as female. And ironically, I was invested in it too. But not because I identified as a girl, but because I identified as a twin. My sister Jenny and I are fraternal. But our entire lives, we looked and sounded identical, and I loved it. I loved walking into a room with her and watching heads snap around and stare at us like this. It was a huge part of my identity as a twin sister, and I knew that taking testosterone would erase it. My face would become more masculine, my voice would drop, and we would never, ever again look or sound identical. And the thought of that made me really sad, honestly, because I knew that making that decision would not only have an irreversible impact on my identity, but on hers as well. But one day, she was at my house and we were standing in the kitchen, and I told her, I've made an appointment to talk to a therapist about my gender identity issues. And she said to me, I knew that one day you'd come to me and say that you had to deal with this, and I'm glad. Because while on the outside, the rest of the world has always seen you like this, I know that deep down on the inside, you've always been like this. My gender journey hasn't been a giant leap as much as sort of a series of giant leaps, like 3 big ones, starting with the one that I knew would have probably the biggest impact on me emotionally and probably the smallest impact on my identity as a twin, and that was my decision to have top surgery, to have my breasts surgically removed and my chest reconstructed to look male. But that's easier said than done. Because in our society, women should look a certain way. And when you're born female and you voluntarily choose to have your breasts removed, people think there's something really, really wrong with you. Wrong enough that in order to schedule my surgery, my surgeon required a letter from my therapist diagnosing me with a mental condition called gender identity disorder. And wrong enough that when I went to my family doctor for my pre-surgical clearance, when he suspected what I might be having surgery for, not because I told him, but because he Googled the name of my surgeon, he refused to see me. And he'd been my doctor for over 10 years. And wrong enough that when I ended up in the emergency room a week after my surgery with a blood clot in my leg, I lied to the doctors, the nurses, the ultrasound techs. I told them I had had a breast reduction because I was afraid that if I told them the truth, they'd refuse to see me too. But not wrong enough that my health insurance company recognized my counseling and my surgery as medically necessary treatments for my diagnosed mental condition and would agree to cover the cost, so I paid for those out of pocket. But despite that, the effects of surgery, the impact on surgery on my life, life-changing. For the first time since puberty, when I looked in the mirror, at least from here to here, it looked right. But then a funny thing happened. It was like, as soon as I had my male chest, it became harder and harder for me to hear people call me by my female birth name and female pronouns. So I made my second decision. I decided to legally change my name to Decker and ask everyone in my life to please refer to me by he or him. But unlike with my chest surgery, which actually I did really quietly, I only told my very close family, a couple friends. When I changed my name, I had to tell literally every single person in my life. So not just my family and friends and clients and coworkers, my lawn guy, my pool guy, my electrician, my veterinarian, my neighbors, my bar friends, everybody. And when you change your name to the name of the opposite gender, it's awkward. It is really awkward. I felt like I needed to somehow explain this to them, to come out as transgender somehow, but then I thought, well, does my pool guy need to know my life story? What? The entire process was gut-wrenching. It was by far the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It took months and months and months of phone calls and emails and heart-to-hearts, and it was messy and it felt endless, and I was scared out of my mind the entire time. But in the end, I survived. And pretty much everyone who mattered to me embraced me and were fine. A handful did not. And I definitely learned who my real friends are. But I also learned something else. I learned that life can't be lived in a bubble of family and friends and coworkers, that it's a big world out there and it's full of strangers. And the cab drivers and the ticket takers and the TSA agents, they did not get the memo. They didn't know I'd changed my name to a male name. They did not pick up on male pronouns, and they definitely did not notice this. They noticed this. To them, I looked like a she, I sounded like a her, or a ma'am. So I made my third decision. I chose to walk away from the part of my identity that I loved the most, the part that I shared with my twin sister. I chose to take testosterone because by then I'd figured out that the only way that I was going to get the rest of the world to see this as anything other than female was to take testosterone. And in the end, I really, really needed the world to see me the way that I've always seen myself. Today, they do. Pretty much everyone I meet now sees me as male. And they see me like this. But the cool thing is that my sister sees me that way too. But there are still hurdles, because changing gender is not the same thing as changing gender marker. And that one letter is attached to everything. From our birth certificates to our death certificates and everything in between. Even in order to buy a plane ticket to get me here for this event today, the airline requires that I disclose my gender. But legally changing a gender marker is not as easy as choosing an M or an F from a drop-down menu. There are laws and rules and regulations and processes, and they're up to each individual state. My birth certificate still says female. I was born in Kirkwood, and here in the state of Missouri, in order to change the gender marker on your birth certificate, they required a state-issued court order based upon proof of surgery. But I live in Arizona. So to get that court order would mean petitioning the court here, getting a court date, buying a plane ticket, flying to Missouri, standing in front of a judge with a medical affidavit signed by my surgeon saying, yes, I cut his boobs off, paying a fee, taking that to the Department of Vital Records, paying another fee, only for them to issue me a new birth certificate marked amended. But it could be worse. In some states, they require not just proof of chest surgery, but proof of genital surgery as well, which can easily cost up to $100,000. And in some states, they will change your gender marker, but they'll actually cross out the old one and put the new one right next to it. So essentially, anyone who sees that knows you were born that other gender anyway. my driver's license and my health insurance policy both still say female, because it's a really good idea if they match. But changing them both to male could give my health insurance company the right to deny any claim that I make having to do with my female anatomy. Because the way they see it, men don't get things like ovarian cancer. My social security card, female. My college transcripts, female. And on and on and on. So despite everything that I've done to get the world to just see me as male, on paper, I'm still female. Our society is set up to keep us in these two boxes. But why? Is all of this gendering really necessary? Just for a minute, I want you to throw out everything that you know about what is male and what is female. Throw it out. And imagine a world where gender isn't left up to doctors or judges. One where we're all able to claim our own gender based on what's between our ears, rather than have it assigned to us based on what's between our legs. Here, we're all able to self-identify as male, as female, as both, or as neither. And here we never assume someone else's gender because of how they look, how they sound, or because of what name they go by. In this world, when you walk up and hand your TEDx ticket to the attendant, instead of them automatically calling you sir or ma'am, they say, "Enjoy the event today, my friend." And when you sit down and start chatting with the stranger next to you, before they ask you what you do for a living, they ask you which pronouns you prefer to go by. In this world, I wonder, would I have gotten those hockey skates and joined a team? Or become an Eagle Scout or a football coach? Would I have had to change my birth name because it was too female? Or take testosterone to be seen as male and sacrifice part of my identity as a twin? Would my chest surgery simply have been seen as cosmetic surgery, something I chose to do to help me feel happy in my own body, like fixing a birth defect? In this world, one free from this rigid binary, I wonder, would I have had to come out as transgender at all? In the past several years, I've come out to thousands of people, including all of you here today. But if we lived in the world that I just described, perhaps I would have walked onto this stage tonight and come out to you as an artist, or a writer, as a dog lover, or an ESPN junkie, or as a lifelong Dolly Parton fan instead. Or maybe I simply would have come out to you today as who I am. Thank you.